Trick Dimension says, leaving the Philippines next week after being here since August. Here's my reports: the good, the bad, and the ugly. I am an American who is almost 40 years old, and I've been spending these past 4 months chilling with my Filipino fiance. I lived in Silong, Cavite most of the months, but I've also spent time living in Makati, BGC, but also traveled to Batangas, Tagaytay, Muntinlupa, Rizal, and Taguig. Only stayed on the Luzon region, never visited the Visayas and Mindanao, so keep that in mind. My first time coming to the country was back in July for 2 weeks, but I did mostly touristy things and took advantage of the stronger US dollar over the peso without trying to experience life as a working, lower middle class Filipino. When I came back in August to stay long term, I wanted to try modern conveniences and live more authentically like my fiance and her family do. So more reliance on taking public transit like trikes, jeepneys, etc. Less eating out at restaurants, adopting a more frugal mindset despite my income, washing clothes by hand, shopping for food at wet markets, no hot showers, using Tabo, etc. The house I live in is very dilapidated, holes in the roofing, exposed concrete bricks. It would be considered very rundown and impoverished in the US, and there can be at least 14 of us living in this house at the same time. Most of her family lived in a large single room on the floor. This experience has only made me appreciate just how good I have it in America, and all the first world problems I bitch and moan about just seem ridiculous in light of what I've experienced. I have never take this for granted ever again. I'm lucky to be in America. The honeymoon period of the Philippines for me wore off about a month of living here, and by the second month I was exhausted, and I could not wait to return back to the US. I despise living in this country, and the substandard quality of life is too much for me to bear. Yeah, I'll admit, I am a spoiled American. The people aren't the problem. It's the infrastructure and the food, but also some things I truly miss, like being able to drive my own car. Before I get into the good and the bad, I understand the following is anecdotal, but a few things I've read here that didn't align with my experience. Number one, Filipino scamming, lying, cheating, deceiving, etc. All the months I've lived here, I did not experience in a Filipino I interacted with were extremely courteous, polite, and respectful towards me. They were all hospitable. My knowledge of Tagalog is limited to a handful of words and phrases, but they all made an effort to understand what I was saying in English to the best of their ability, which I appreciate. I have a pretty high opinion of the interpersonal relationships I formed. I know this ain't a religious subreddit, but as an aside, I was blown away by the practicing Christians I met at church. It was refreshing to see serious they take their faith and even inspired me. I know the Philippines is more culturally Catholic than anything, so it was all the more striking. And no, I'm not a Protestant. Anytime we would go shopping at what local market or taking jeepney trikes, they never tried to upcharge because I was a foreigner. In fact, we did get discounts if we bought a few shirts together, for example. The only times I felt scammed was when I went to remote provincial areas of the Philippines where they charge you fees for everything. Environmental fees, entrance fees, ice cube fees, yes, actually charged me per ice cube, peso, Wi-Fi, etc. We went to a beach resort in Batangas where we got charged an environmental fee despite tons of garbage and trash littered on the beach and in water. That was the only clear incidence I ever felt ripped off. My fiancé siblings got hosed by even more hidden fees for their family stay at the resort. It's possible that my fiancé being with me most of the time may have influenced the outcomes of these interactions. Here are the good. Filipino food can be decent if cooked at home. So while I am in agreement the Filipino cuisine isn't that good, it makes sense why you only have Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Thai food back in the US. A few dishes made at home is okay. I was pretty much forced into learning how to cook Filipino cuisine. 2. Filipinos. I already wrote about this above, so I won't retreat, but The people have been great. I suppose he means repeat. The people have been great. I never encountered anyone being rude or obnoxious towards me. Everyone seemed thrilled whenever I showed up to buy something or even just converse. If there's a negative, it's that people sure love to stare at me as I was from another planet, especially when I'd take a jeepney, which I'm sure some of them wondered why the FM didn't just take a grab. I have suspicion people here respect me a lot more because I was doing the whole within Rome, do as the Romans do. If anything, I may have been a problem after the second month or so, as I was getting more irritable, homesick, frustrated, which may have expressed in the being curt with others or something of being a dick. 3. Spanish lattes. I'm going to see if I can order this back home, as the local baristas don't really use condensed milk in drinks. But this was my favorite coffee drink. My fiance likes it cold, but I like it hot. Calamansi fruit. This was good and is like a lemon lime mandarin orange hybrid flavor too. Use this in sauces and marinades, but there were some calamansi juice drinks I enjoyed too. Bidets. Never used one before, but something I'd like to have back home for sure. Some packaged food and drinks I enjoyed. Some downtown barangays just feel so alive. If you ignore the pollution, I loved how bustling some of these smaller barangays were. People selling food on the street corner, the trikes, bikes, e-bikes, jeepneys zipping by, all the people walking up and down streets, the various activities happening outside, etc. It was an atmosphere that felt lively and nothing I see back home. Now the bad. Lack of hot water to shower. People think I'm crazy for taking a hot shower when it's so humid outside, but it's definitely a big quality of life for me as that's what I prefer. The house I live in, I have to boil water and then use a tabo if I wanted a hot shower, not the end of the world. The mosquitoes, I got bit a ton of mosquitoes in the first 2 months. I usually sleep naked and bed at home, but here I had to wear sleeve pajamas, shirts and pants, and socks as the mosquitoes loved my feet. I used off lotion too. 3. Coca-Cola. An original Coke is my favorite soft drink. Most of the time I stuck with either water or tea, but there's a certain meal I gotta have Coke with. Well, I really dislike how Cokes taste out here. They're, quote, less sugar variant, which have the massy aftertaste. Pepsi are far too sweet for me to consider as an alternative. The humidity, but I got used to it. Sure, I was sweltering August, but I got used to it. The only time where it really bothered me was trying to sleep at night. I'd sometimes be woken up by how humid our bedroom was. Also, the humidity feels worse if you add in the terrible pollution. Airbnbs can be misleading. There was only one Airbnb I stayed at this handful of once, so it did not have a single cockroach. The rest of them didn't really look as immaculate as the pictures suggest, or sometimes the things may not work, like the portable water heater in the shower. I wish people would be a little bit more honest in their reviews. Now the ugly. The food. I almost wanted to put infrastructure up here as number one complaint, but food matters more to me, as dealing with infrastructure can be circumvented by staying at home. And after all, I gotta eat to live. And I place a great deal on eating, especially when going to a foreign country. The whole point of traveling, in my opinion, is for the food. Before I get into Filipino food itself, I have to say that the Philippines' attempt at making other countries' cuisine or stuff like burgers, pizza, etc. was almost universally a fail. I remember my fiance's family ordered Shakey's one night, and I thought when it was maybe the worst pizza I ever had in my life. It made Lunchable pizzas look highbrow. We went later to a Pizza Hut that was somehow even worse, which was unthinkable. The pizza sauce tasted like expired can of Chef Boyardee, and whatever the hell that cheese was. The buffalo wings tasted like a super sour smelly gym sock locked inside a human locker door from a fat guy. It was the most offensive bite I had. After a few other attempts at eating hot wings, I've concluded that Philippines has no idea how hot sauce or buffalo sauce is supposed to taste. The McDonald's in this country was even worse than worst McDonald's I had in the States. At least the cheap burgers at McDonald's in the US still have some semblance of a beef flavor. Here in the Philippines, I have no idea what kind of mystery meat they used. As an aside, I'd love to know why McDonald's, other fast food places like Jollibee serve spaghetti. The best Philippines could offer when it came to American-style food was maybe S&R, but even that was very mediocre and just a Costco food court knockoff. I'm not a snob either. I have no problem eating Domino's or McDonald's. I'm also at expensive upscale restaurants. I can enjoy both in equal measure, but even setting very low expectations in the Philippines, I still wind up being disappointed. We had people telling us how good something like Vikings at Mall of Asia was, but that was another mediocre disappointment. After eating at a few other restaurants, Mall of Asia, I fail to understand how that attracts Chinese and other Asian tourists there. Nothing remarkable. Dairy in this country, you can forget about it. Their cheese and use of margarine, reconstituted milk in cartons, etc. is awful. This is a huge loss for me, as I consume a ton of fresh dairy back home all the time. You have to spend a lot more on imported dairy products, but it's just not worth it when the taste still ain't good. The lack of quality beef. This is well known, like the dairy, so I won't blabber the point. I had to go to S&R for 80/20 ground beef, and sadly, the ribeye they had hardly had much marbling too. The beef found in other markets were of lower quality cuts next to no marbling. I mostly just stuck to pork and chicken as the protein and fish. Now, as to what Filipinos mainly eats, their food could be great if done right, but most of the time it comes out of bland, lacking any flavor, very oily, etc. A lot of the stuff they eat is fried, and it's rare if ever saw vegetables being served. There's a few Filipino dishes that are all vegetarian, sure, but it doesn't seem like a staple part of their diet. I stayed clear of all street food because I was worried about getting sick from it. Next is the infrastructure. I don't even know where to begin here. I didn't do any driving in this country, but what an absolute shit show it is. I'd be in a car accident probably the first day if I drove, with how people just love to cut each other off and nobody seems to abide by any traffic laws. It's practically a free-for-all. I can't tell you how many times I'd be on a bus or a jeepney or trike and just wincing at the motorcyclists trying to squeeze through a millimeter of space just to overtake someone. It just all looks insanely dangerous. And the drivers in public transportation just made me nauseous, as there was so much slamming brakes, stop and go, and never trying to drive smoothly. The sardine can on wheels, aka jeepneys, were the cheapest option to get around, but you have to wait until it is crammed with people before it departs. One time, we waited a little bit more than just an hour before a jeepney left the station. Another time, there was barely a gap of space on one of those benches in a jeepney, and the heavier set woman tried to squeeze in through the space next to me, which inevitably ejected me out of my seat. Trikes were next cheapest option to get around in, but also felt like a death trap on wheels. I was super hunched over while inside them, the back of my head hitting the roof inside, and always worried if they hit a speed bump too fast, it might have caused my neck to snap. We took a van to Rizal, and that was one of the most uncomfortable rides I've ever taken. Not only was it crammed, but it had no shock absorbers. It took a few other grab car rides that also lacked in shocks, and those were horrible experiences, as you can imagine, especially with roads. There ain't much in the way of sidewalks or walking. I did a lot of walking still, but even that got dangerous. When we were walking in the city with all the motorcycles around that didn't seem to care about pedestrian crossings. Besides the transportation, checking out grocery stores is a pain. It can take forever. You have like one cashier and then a bunch of other workers standing around do nothing. One time, we were waiting in line so long to check out, I had to leave to go to the bathroom, so my fiancé had to hold our place in line. And usually, what we would do at checkout line is split up just in case one line moves faster than the other. Cashiers love to take their sweet time and package everything carefully. And there seems to be so much red tape because it's a low-trust society. Everything just moves at a glacial pace. I remember going to the BI to get an ACR card, and the lines for Filipino citizen services was insane and hardly moved at all. Sure, I was a BI for a while, but it was nothing compared to the social services that the Filipinos were waiting in line for. I felt bad for them. This place has definitely tested my patience many times. I definitely didn't have the patience for things like I used to when I was younger. Regarding things like blackouts, I only experienced one significant blackout that lasted 2 days. because of the recent typhoon. The fiber internet here, for the most part, is somewhat reliable, but gets a lot slower at night, and sometimes connections will drop. There's a lot of cell coverage dead zones, for sure. I'm on Verizon's ultimate plan for international travel, but it uses global or smart, but it's not reliable at all, and very slow. Next is the pollution and air quality. The first time I visited the Philippines in July, I developed a coughing fit like half a week into my trip. I blamed the strong AC units and the poor air quality. I was near Manila. Breathing in air in Metro Manila is like putting your mouth over the tailpipe of a running dirty go-kart and inhaling. I am almost convinced smoking a pack of cigarettes a day in the US would have been healthier than the air I inhaled here. When I came back in August, I experienced the same non-stop coughing until it finally cleared up around week 3. I was miserable for the first month, and on top of that, add in the humidity. For me, going out in more dense area cities required wearing a mask at all times, just so I could breathe much better. I'm glad there I stayed in Sea Line was way far from the congestion and pollution. Next is the noise. Loud as hell, exhaust karaoke blasting at 2 a.m., neighbors amplifying worship music next door, the roosters and just general disregard for noise control. Filipinos tolerate too much noise pollution. I had to work overnight while staying here, and I tried to avoid cooking, turning on the lights in the kitchen, and when I needed something, but her family was no problem clanging pots and pans, sizzling oil, turning on bright lights, etc., while other people in the family were trying to sleep. I know this is a cultural difference, but just couldn't do it. I felt too rude to interrupt people sleeping, even if her family tried to encourage me that it was okay to do so. This is this man's experience. Basically, it wraps up everything I've been talking about on this channel this entire time. Everything from noise pollution, traffic, lack of urgency, lazy people, internet connectivity, and of course pollution. And there's no surprise that although this was posted in an expat group about Filipinos, every single comment is my Filipino person defending the country. It's crazy what Reddit has become, but that is the reality of it now. What Filipinos do is infiltrate all these groups that are meant to be solely for expats, travelers, or people from outside the country sharing their experiences, but Filipinos have onion skin and cannot take it. And instead of providing viable reasons or responses, they simply tell this person to go back home and how he is obviously spoiled or has no money. Imagine an average Filipino telling an American he has no money when they themselves work for $8 a day. Thanks for listening. God bless.